Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
I grew up in a military family, so joining the Marines felt like the natural path for me. My dad served, my grandfather served, and the discipline and structure of that life always appealed to me. After my 4 years were up, I decided not to re-enlist. I wanted to see what civilian life had to offer, maybe find a career that didn't involve getting shot at. I settled into a quiet job at a construction company and tried to adjust to normalcy, but you never really leave the Marines behind. The training stays with you, the mindset stays with you, and sometimes that comes in handy. This particular Friday evening, I was driving back from my sister's place in the next state over. She'd just had her second kid, and I'd spent the weekend helping her husband install a new fence in their backyard. The drive home was long and quiet, winding through dense forest with barely any traffic. I hadn't seen another car for at least an hour. The radio kept cutting in and out, struggling to find a signal through all those trees. It was peaceful in a way, just me and the road. Then I rounded the bend and spotted a car on the shoulder with its hazard lights blinking. 3 guys were standing around it, and one of them was waving his arms, trying to flag me down. I'm not the type to leave someone stranded on the side of the road, especially out here in the middle of nowhere. So I slowed down and pulled over about 20 feet behind their car. I got out of my truck and walked toward them. Something felt off though. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but my instincts were telling me to stay alert. I called out to them and asked if they needed some help. The tallest one, a lanky guy with a scraggly beard, stepped forward and told me their car had just died on them. He asked if I happened to have some jumper cables. I looked at their car. It looked perfectly fine to me. No steam coming from the hood, no grinding noises, nothing that suggested engine trouble. I told him I had some in my truck and that I'd go grab them. I turned to walk back to my vehicle, and that's when I heard quick footsteps behind me. Years of training kicked in automatically. I spun around just in time to see the guy with the scraggly beard lunging at me with something in his hand. It was a tire iron. I sidestepped his attack and he stumbled past me, nearly losing his balance. His 2 bodies started closing in. One had a shaved head and was built like a linebacker. The other one had been quiet until now. The guy with the scraggly beard demanded I give them my wallet and keys, threatening that they wouldn't have to hurt me if I cooperated. I told him flatly that wasn't going to happen. The guy with the shaved head cracked his knuckles and grinned. He pointed out that there were 3 of them, and only one of me, and that I shouldn't be stupid about this. I smirked a little. These idiots had no idea what they were getting themselves into. I gave them one last chance to walk away, telling them I really didn't want to hurt them. The 3rd guy let out a bark of laughter and made fun of me, saying I actually thought I could take them all on. That's when they rushed me. The guy with the scraggly beard came at me again with a tire iron. I was ready for him this time. I caught his wrist mid-swing and twisted it hard. The tire iron clattered onto the asphalt. In the same motion, I pulled him toward me and drove my knee into his stomach. He went down gasping for air. The guy with the shaved head was next. He threw a wild haymaker that I easily ducked under. When his fist whooshed over my head, I stepped in close and delivered a quick, sharp elbow to his solar plexus. The air left his lungs in a rush, and he staggered back with his eyes wide. The quiet guy hesitated for a moment. He clearly hadn't expected his buddies to go down so quickly. But then anger flashed in his eyes, and he charged at me like a bull. I sidestepped at the last second and stuck my foot out. He tripped and went sprawling face first onto the road. The whole thing was over in less than a minute. I stood there, barely out of breath, surrounded by 3 groaning would-be robbers. I asked them if we were done here, or if they wanted to go another round. The guy with the scraggly beard was still clutching his stomach. He managed to wheeze out a question, asking who I was. I told him I was someone they really shouldn't have messed with, and that I was a Marine who dealt with a lot worse than 3 clowns like them. The look of realization and fear that spread across their faces was almost comical. The guy with the shaved head managed to get back to his feet. He raised his hands in surrender and apologized, saying they didn't know who I was. He begged me not to kill them. I rolled my eyes. I told them I wasn't going to kill them, but I was going to call the police and have them arrested for attempted robbery and assault. The quiet guy was nursing a bloody nose from his fall. He suddenly found his voice again and tried to plead with me. He said they'd already apologized and asked if I couldn't just let them go. They promised they wouldn't do it again. I told him sorry didn't cut it, and that they could have seriously hurt someone who wasn't able to defend themselves. I pulled out my phone and dialed 911. When I explained the situation to the dispatcher, I kept a watchful eye on the three would-be robbers. They sat on the ground looking defeated and scared. It was hard to believe that just a few minutes ago, they'd been so confident and threatening. About 20 minutes later, we heard the sound of approaching sirens. 2 police cars pulled up, and 4 officers got out with their hands on their holsters when they looked over the situation. One of them, a middle-aged man with graying hair, approached me cautiously. He asked if I was the one who'd called this in. I confirmed that I was and explained that these 3 gentlemen had tried to rob me, but I'd managed to subdue them. The officer looked at the 3 men sitting on the ground, then back at me. He seemed impressed. He asked if I'd really taken on all 3 of them by myself. I confirmed that I had, and mentioned I was a former Marine with some training in hand-to-hand combat. The officer nodded appreciatively. He told me they'd need to take my statement. Then he turned to the would-be robbers, who were now being handcuffed by the other officers. He told them they were under arrest for attempted robbery and assault, and began reading them their rights. After giving my statement to the police and watching when the 3 men were loaded into the back of the police cars, I finally got back into my truck to continue my journey home. The next few weeks were something else. Apparently, my little roadside adventure had caught the attention of the local media. They ran a story about the former Marine who single-handedly took down 3 robbers. My phone wouldn't stop ringing with interview requests. My sister thought it was hilarious. My old buddies from the Corps gave me endless grief about it. But honestly, I was just glad I'd been there instead of someone who couldn't defend themselves. My family had owned the land for generations, passing it down through the years until it finally came to me. It was a decent stretch of property, mostly wooded with some open fields, and I used it for hunting and recreation. The place meant a lot to me, not just because of the family connection, but because it was supposed to be a quiet retreat from the chaos of everyday life. I had installed several game cameras around the property to monitor wildlife and keep an eye on things when I wasn't around. It was a smart investment that would soon prove more valuable than I ever imagined. A few weeks ago, I was away for work, traveling across several counties, when my buddy called me up. He told me we had a problem at my place. I asked him what was going on. He explained that they'd been catching trespassers on the game cameras and that some folks on off-road vehicles kept coming onto my property. I sighed, feeling frustrated and helpless being so far away. I told him that wasn't good and asked if he could do anything about it. He said he'd put up a new gate and that it wasn't much, but it might deter them. I thanked him and told him I appreciated it. For a few days it seemed like the solution worked, but then I got another call from him. He gave me the bad news that they'd broken through the gate. I asked him what happened and how they did it. He explained they used an off-road vehicle to smash it down, and that he had it all on camera. I could feel my blood pressure rising. These people had some nerve. I told him this was getting ridiculous and asked what we were supposed to do now. He said he had an idea and asked if I'd ever heard of a SWAT stopper setup. I admitted I hadn't and asked what that was. He explained it was like a hidden barrier and that we'd make it look like a regular gate, but it would be reinforced with steel so they wouldn't see it coming. I had to admit, it sounded like a good plan. My friend was always full of ideas like this. I told him alright and asked how soon he could set it up. He said he had some scrap steel we could use and that, if I gave him a couple of days, he'd have it ready. True to his word, he got to work. He buried 2 10-foot poles, leaving just enough exposed to look like a 4-foot-tall gate door. Then he welded up a gate using heavy-duty steel straps. To complete the illusion, he painted it to match the fence and rebuilt the old wooden gate in front of it. I was still away when my friend called me with an update. He told me it was all set up and that now we just had to wait. We didn't have to wait long. A couple of days later, I got the call I'd been both dreading and anticipating. He told me I wasn't gonna believe what happened. I asked him what it was. He excitedly explained that the SWAT stopper worked and that those trespassers came back with their off-road vehicle, probably thinking they'd smashed through like before. But when they hit the gate, their vehicle flipped over. I asked if anyone was hurt. He said no, they were fine, just shaken up, and that one of the bikers crashed into the flipped vehicle, but they were all walking and talking. I told him that was a relief because I didn't want anyone seriously injured, even if they were trespassing. He agreed and said they were pretty shocked when their usual plan didn't work out and that I should have seen their faces. I chuckled, imagining the scene. I asked him what happens now. He said charges would be pressed against them and that they were being charged with trespassing and vandalism. I asked if we could do that and whether the gate was even legal. He assured me it was all above board and explained that the gate was technically part of the fence line now, that it was just attached to the fence and only looked like a gate, so we were in the clear. I thanked him and told him I owed him one. He said not to mention it, and that's what friends were for. When I finally got back home, I went to inspect the damage and see my friend's handiwork for myself. The gate looked innocent enough from the outside, just like any other old wooden gate you'd see on a farm property. But behind that facade was a solid steel barrier that had taught those trespassers something they wouldn't soon forget. Over the next few days, I heard about the trespassers. Apparently, they were a group of local kids who'd been using my property as their personal playground for off-road adventures. One afternoon, while I was fixing up some fencing, I saw a car pull up to my property. A middle-aged woman got out, looking none too pleased. I braced myself for what was coming. She asked if I was the owner of this property. I told her yes and asked if I could help her. She said her son was injured on my property last week and demanded an explanation. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. I explained that her son was trespassing on private property and that we had it all on camera. She insisted that didn't matter and that I couldn't just set traps for people. I told her it wasn't a trap but a reinforced gate to protect my property from vandals who kept breaking in. She complained that her poor baby could have been seriously hurt. I said I understood her concern, but her son and his friends had been repeatedly trespassing and damaging property, and they were lucky they weren't hurt worse, considering how recklessly they were behaving. Her face turned red. She said this wasn't over, and that I'd be hearing from her lawyer. When she stormed off, it was clear that the apple didn't fall far from the tree when it came to entitlement. I never did hear from her lawyer, probably because any attorney worth their salt would have told her she had no case. Her son had been caught red-handed on camera, multiple times, breaking through gates and trespassing. The reinforced gate was perfectly legal, just a stronger barrier to protect my property. There was no hidden trap, no intent to harm anyone. It was simply a fence that could withstand the kind of abuse these kids had been dishing out. Over the next few weeks, things quieted down. The trespassers clearly got the message and moved on to whatever other trouble they could find. I decided to reach out to some other local landowners to see if they'd been having similar issues. Turns out quite a few of them had stories of their own about trespassers and vandals. We started talking about forming a neighborhood watch of sorts to keep an eye out for each other's properties. It was good to know I wasn't alone in dealing with this kind of nonsense. 6 years ago, I moved into an apartment above a bar and pizza place. The setup seemed perfect. There were 4 apartments total, and each one came with its own designated parking spot right across the small lot. The spots weren't subtle either. Huge signs marked each one with tenant parking only in big reflective letters that you could see from a mile away. Everything was going smoothly for the first few months. My schedule was pretty demanding since I worked late shifts, usually not getting home until 10 at night or even later. Every now and then some customer from downstairs would accidentally park in one of our spots, but it was never a big deal. I'd just walk into the bar, let them know, and they'd track down whoever it was. The whole thing would be resolved in minutes. It only happened maybe once a month, so it was more of a minor inconvenience than anything else. Then one night, everything changed. I pulled into the lot after a long shift and found this massive white and chrome beast taking up my spot. The thing was huge. one of those oversized suburban vehicles with fancy rims and tinted windows. Whoever owned it had stripped off all the logos and decals, probably thinking it made them look mysterious or something. I went through my usual routine and headed into the bar. I asked if anyone knew who owned the huge white thing in my spot. The bartender said nobody had mentioned anything about it and offered to write down my plate number so I wouldn't get a ticket. I told him that would be great. I figured by morning it would be gone. A week went by and that monstrosity hadn't moved even an inch. The front manager at the bar was nice enough to give me one of their employee parking passes so I wouldn't get ticketed while I parked somewhere else in the lot. Days turned into more days and I started asking around. My neighbors and I were pretty tight. We'd hang out downstairs together, grab pizza and drinks, that kind of thing. But nobody had any information about this mystery vehicle. I asked my neighbors if they'd seen anyone getting in or out of that white thing. They said they hadn't, and that it had just been sitting there like some kind of expensive lawn ornament. I even asked people in the building next door, but nobody knew anything. By the second week, my annoyance had transformed into full-blown anger. There were nights when the entire lot was packed and I'd have to park a block away, then move my car after midnight when spaces finally opened up. To make the whole situation even more absurd, the vehicle started collecting parking tickets. You'd think that would motivate whoever owned it to move the thing, but nothing changed. It just sat there, taking up space and mocking all of us. About 3 weeks into this ordeal, I came home to find the only available spot was right next to that stupid vehicle. I was so fed up that I didn't even bother going upstairs. Instead, I went straight to the bar where I could see some of my neighbors hanging out. My neighbor waved me over when I walked in and told me to come join them since everyone was complaining about our new parking lot decoration. I grabbed a seat and ordered a drink, ready to let out all my frustration. I said that if that thing didn't move soon, I was going to lose it. Another neighbor agreed and mentioned having to carry all their groceries from 2 blocks away yesterday because there was nowhere to park. Even the bar staff were getting annoyed. The bartender jumped into the conversation and said it was becoming a real headache keeping track of all our cars now, and they were constantly worried about us getting tickets. When the night went on, more drinks were served, and our complaints got louder and more colorful. By closing time, we were all pretty drunk and thoroughly worked up about the whole situation. I went to pay my tab and realized I didn't have my wallet on me. Panic hit me for a second before I remembered my terrible habit of leaving it on my car seat. I told the bartender I thought I'd left my wallet in my car and asked if I could run and grab it real quick. The bartender said no problem and joked that he knew where I lived, so I better not forget to come back and pay. I stumbled out to my car, found my wallet exactly where I thought it would be, and turned around to head back inside. That's when I found myself standing face to face with a vehicle that had been making our lives miserable for weeks. Maybe it was all the alcohol I'd consumed. Maybe it was weeks of built-up frustration. Whatever the reason, something inside me just snapped in that moment. I looked down at the keys in my hand and thought about how satisfying it would feel to do something about this situation. Without really thinking it through, I pressed one of my keys against the shiny expensive paint and dragged it all the way down the passenger side. The sound of metal scraping against metal was oddly satisfying, and even in the dim street light, I could see the deep scratch I'd left behind. When I'd done it, all kinds of emotions hit me at once. Satisfaction, guilt, fear, and this strange sense of relief all mixed together. I quickly headed back to the bar, paid what I owed, and went up to my apartment, half expecting to hear police sirens at any moment. The next morning I woke up with a pounding headache and this overwhelming sense of dread. When everything from the night before came flooding back to me, I rushed to the window to see what I'd done. To my complete shock and relief, the vehicle was gone. It had disappeared just as mysteriously as it had shown up, leaving behind nothing but an empty parking spot and a bunch of unanswered questions. For the next few days, I was constantly on edge, waiting for something bad to happen. But nothing did. No angry owner came storming into the bar demanding answers. No police showed up asking questions. It was like the whole thing had never even happened. Months later, I heard some interesting gossip that made me wonder if there was more to the story. Apparently, the apartment right next to mine had been used for drug dealing. The previous tenant had gotten arrested for selling hard drugs, and for months afterward, people kept showing up banging on doors looking for him. It made me think that maybe the vehicle belonged to the dealer. Maybe he needed somewhere to hide his flashy ride while he was in jail or lying low. It was just a theory, but it helped me feel a little less guilty, imagining I'd vandalized a drug dealer's car instead of some innocent person's property. Keying someone's car isn't the kind of thing a mature adult does. But I can't deny that it solved a problem that had been making life difficult for me, all my neighbors, and even the bar staff. In the years since then, I've moved on from that apartment and that job. It's not a story I tell people with pride, but who knows? And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.